In 2022, there was a promotional Facebook post for a weekend party to be held at a tavern, which later drew media attention in South Africa after a certain incident concluded with kuzofiwa, which in a party context is the slang term for "is going to be a great time." But its literal translation in some local South African languages, however, mean there is going to be death. But before we get into the real story, if you seem to have an interest in disturbing, dark, and mysteriously spooky true-life horror stories, please do consider subscribing if you enjoy such stories, even though it can be extreme. Also turn on all post notifications and consider liking the video. It does help the channel. And with that said, let's get straight into it. The Scenery Park is a township in the southern city of East London, which lies on the Indian Ocean coast, nearly 620 miles south of Johannesburg. In 1948, after the National Party came to power in South Africa and began to implement the policy of apartheid, a doctrine which oversaw the total segregation of races across provinces in South Africa, the city of East London in the province of Eastern Cape was no different. The area does have a lot of history. However, towards the end of the apartheid regime in 1994, East London became part of the province of Eastern Cape in South Africa. Within the nation at large is a tradition known as Hanqwa Ipepa, which in English translates to pens down, normally done by 12th graders or the matriculants, with the aim of it being to celebrate completing the high school national senior certificate examination. But these days, the celebrations are now being done by most of these teenagers following the end of each academic session. On the 24th of June 2022, a Facebook invitation was posted inviting the young students for a free entry to a party on the following day, which was the Saturday night, the 25th of June 2022. There was to be live performances from various DJs within the area and black overall for those who would be attending at the upstairs floor of the building, and extra cash to be paid for those looking to book the VIP section. And then, most importantly for majority, was the presence of free hookahs, also known as water pipes or hobbly bubblies. Free food and alcohol were also to be served at a local run tavern known as Enyobeni, an offer which was too enticing to be just ignored or turned down for these teenagers and for some East London locals. Following the relaxation of the last restrictions following the COVID-19 lockdown, it was for that Facebook post that on the late evening of the 25th of June 2022 that Thembinkosi Sewane would dress up and then met his mother, whom he had already asked for permission to join his older friends to celebrate the end of their school exams. But before leaving, his mother told him to make sure to be careful and stay in the company of his friends and to return as soon as the celebrations were over. Thembi then looked at his mother and told her not to worry, that he would be coming back immediately after the event was over. As Thembi made his way out of his home, his mother walked him out, looked at him affectionately, hugged him, and then waved goodbye as she watched her little boy join the rest of his friends who had been waiting for him just outside his home. But that was before she told them to make sure they were always together and to be responsible, which they replied back saying they will. Now these young teens went to different schools around the area, and it's been a tough academic year for everyone. But after their final exams was over, tonight they had decided to have a good time by attending the party at the location, which was some minutes away from where each of them lived. The friends headed at a local park around 6 to 7 p.m. in the evening of that day to celebrate the pens down before taking the celebrations into the local Enyobeni Tavern. It was around 8 to 9 p.m. when Thembi, his friends, and a crowd of other people made their way to the location. That night, it soon clocked 10 p.m. at East London, and as more people who saw the Facebook invitation of a free party made their way inside, soon the premises became crowded while some of the people who arrived earlier had already made their way inside. The tavern had one more floor, and as more people bribed their way in with others being held back by the bouncers who were at the entrance of the tavern, they continued to do their best to avoid the inside tavern from being overcrowded. But over the following hours, more and more people began to sneak in, as there were just a few of the bouncers available to control a multitude of hundreds of people. Soon, it clocked 12 a.m. to 1 a.m., and as some of the bouncers who couldn't control much of the young people entering in and out of the tavern made a phone call to the tavern owners to inform them of the overcrowded chaos going on, the discussion being on how to control the free party influx. It would be few minutes after this call before the bouncers organized themselves and walked into the upper floor of the tavern and proceeded to spray some substance in the air so that most people would leave the arena before shutting the doors of the tavern just a few minutes later. However, the party continued as if nothing happened. But while some people left the arena trying to head home or to see friends outside or to escape the smell of the sprayed substance, some of the young locals continued to dance, drink, smoke and have a good time with their friends. But by 2 a.m., just an hour later, as majority were still dancing, some of those sitting on the couches with their friends began to show signs of unresponsiveness, as if they were just dozing off to sleep. Then from the dance floor came a loud thud, then another thud, then another thud, then another thud, as people began to drop on the dance floor like flies. Literally. Immediately there was commotion as more people began to observe what was happening and try to make their way out of the shebeen, with some falling on top of each other. Soon, pandemonium erupted as those who were upstairs began to race downstairs to make their way out of the double-story building, while others tried to break nearby windows to jump out. Stampede took over as there was just confusion everywhere, while the atmosphere suddenly turned strange. Now remember, the bouncers had earlier shut the door after they had tried to force people out of the tavern. So people were kicking, banging on the door, shouting for the people outside to open the door and listen to their pleas about something mysterious going on inside the tavern. As some of the young students and other locals who just managed to make their way out and with their hearts racing with fear stood outside, looking in horror at what they had just witnessed, and with some still struggling to breathe. It just didn't make sense to them. Some still had their friends inside the tavern, but they knew they couldn't just go back in because that was literally like sentencing yourself to death. As one of the adults living around the tavern area heard the loud screams from most of the young people who were now outside the tavern, he managed to take a peek inside the tavern through an open window, where the looks in his eyes turned to fear, as bodies were seen all over the floor of the tiny enclosure, with some seen still sitting on the bench but with no sign of physical response or breathing. Others were seen lying on tabletops, everyone now fearing to go inside to inspect for fear of losing their own lives. An alarm was raised as more of the elders began to troop in to take a look at what they had just heard. The police were also soon called on a report of some strange happening that had taken place in that tavern, and with people just mysteriously dropping to the floor unresponsive. And by the early hours of that Sunday, the 26th of June 2022, they made their way to the area, covering their nose and faces. And as one of the safety government officials arrived at the scene, he observed as he saw empty bottles of alcohol, wigs, and even a pastel purple happy birthday sash lay strewn on the dusty streets outside the building. Apparently, there had also been some birthday celebrations on that party night. However, he continued to make his way into the tavern, only to see that so many of the young people who were at the scene were still lying motionless all over the tavern. There were several bodies lying across tables, chairs, and on the floor. But a notable discovery was made. There were no obvious signs of physical injuries on the bodies. The area would be sealed up for the meantime, as it now became a crime scene. And after some hours, daylight broke, and the forensics were called into the scene that early morning as to determine what had really happened. But for the time being, the tavern owners who were now present had their tavern closed down while investigation proceeded. As more people who woke up on that Sunday morning heard the news, including parents whose children hadn't returned that night, including Tembi's mother, whom her son had promised to return that day, gathered outside the tavern. They soon began to sob in pain and agony as the mortuary vehicles came to collect what would be confirmed to be 17 dead bodies, while 4 more people who suffered from critical injuries that early morning were later hospitalized. But tragically, They would also later die hours later while still in hospital. 4 more people were later hospitalized in a critical condition, while other survivors were treated for backache, tight chest, vomiting, and headaches. Further investigation would later reveal that the 21 teenagers who died were between the ages of 13 and 21, with 12 and 9 of them being boys and girls respectively. As parents who still had their kids missing were told to identify them in the mortuary, Tembi's mother also made her way with other parents, and with tears rolling down her face, she confirmed her son as being one of the victims, and he was the youngest of them all, still aged 13 at the time of his demise. As investigation into the cause of the mysterious death would begin, it would turn out that this particular tavern is a shebeen. Now, a shebeen is an illegal bar or club where accessible alcoholic beverages are sold without a license. The term has spread far from its origin in Ireland to Canada, the United States, the United Kingdom, the English-speaking Caribbean, and also in African countries like Zimbabwe, Namibia, Malawi, and of course, in South Africa, where all sorts of locally made drinks, especially the cheaper traditional homemade beer called Mbuti, is served. Although in modern South Africa, many shebeens are now fully legal for consumers 18 years or older. That night, as Tembi and his group of older friends had made their way early for the party, more crowds who later arrived at the location had tried to push and force their way inside, but as the venue got overcrowded, the bouncers, who were beginning to lose control of the situation after receiving information from the tavern owners on how to control the situation, had resorted to spray what others would later describe by smell as some sort of chemical or pepper spray just inside the venue to drive more people out, after which they locked the doors to prevent people from moving inside once the toxic smell in the air inside was over. But it was moments later when survivors would report how after this chemical was sprayed, that the smell of a strong suffocating smell filled the entire club as some of the club goers desperately tried to leave the scene. Unfortunately, some of the youngsters who were still dancing and were not lucky enough to leave the scene began falling, then either lost consciousness and then died, and then more people followed. Those were the third, then another third, which other people began to witness before they also started feeling an uneasy sensation. And as more of them moved through the crowd, escaping through the windows or jumping down, some were banging at the only front exit and entrance door and shouting to be let through. Others were shouting that they were dying and suffocating, while some also yelled out that there were people who can't breathe. One of the survivors would also later speak of how she passed out at the moment after she ran out of breath, although she would later regain consciousness after water was thrown on her face. Others who had died sitting on the chairs and table had just either been conversing with friends, then just felt dizzy, then slept on the sofa, and from there, just lost their lives also. You see, amidst densely populated residences in East London, the building where this tragedy occurred had always received complaints from local residents due to its late opening hours and the noise from the building. Also, most of the elderly residents within the community have never been happy about the tavern, as there had been calls to shut it down due to the negative influence it seemed to have for the younger population, who seemed to love the consumption of the local alcoholic beverages being produced there. South Africa is among the countries in Africa where most alcohol is consumed, and although the legal drinking age is 18 years and above, the local tavern reportedly was said to serve alcohol to even minors, even doing so on that party night, which in South Africa, of course, is illegal and should be off limits to persons under the age of 18. However, safety regulations and drinking age laws are not always enforced, resulting to underage teenagers buying liquors from such shebeens in the townships. As the tragic news spread in the country, different theories began to circulate as to be the reason for the mysterious tragedy. First, some attributed the cause as to be a stampede, but this was quickly ruled out because, like I said before, there was no sign of physical injuries seen on the victims. Some other people would interpret the cause to be something more darker and fetish, pointing out that the teenagers had been targeted that late night using what is known as muti or local shams as part of a ritualistic sacrifice by the owners, but these were just mere speculations as it was never proven. Another theory being carbon monoxide gas, an odorless, colorless gas formed by the incomplete combustion of fuels which are being emitted by portable backup generators, such as that normally used in the Enyobeni Tavern. The rumors of the death being as a result of suffocation from tear gas or a possible gas leak also did not subside. Some also said that maybe something very toxic was inhaled in the supposed pepper spray or chemical spray that were used by the bouncers to control the influx of the crowd. Another theory came that it was either something they ingested, maybe a sort of poisoning from the free food or drink, or even from the hookah pipes that was used for smoking. However, while investigation continued and different theories were being thrown around surrounding the tragedy, the owners of the tavern, who were a couple, would later have their licenses revoked, and on July 2022, so just a month after the horror party, they would be accused of selling and supplying liquors to under 18s and of conniving with and permitting employees and agents to sell or deliver liquor to minors. Following the charges that were laid at the Scenery Park police station, 2 employees were also charged after they were arrested. The charges and arrest caused division among South Africans, as there were those who think the tavern owners are fully or partially to be blamed, or not at all for some people who felt the parents themselves failed in taking responsibility in training their kids positively and guiding them, asking why the children had been allowed to go out so late on a Saturday night to party. However, there are videos such as this showing a parent doing their due diligence as responsible parents. On the other hand, some felt it's not just the parents, but also the younger ones to be blamed, as they tend to engage in drinking, smoking and living such type of lifestyle secretively without the knowledge of their parents. However, some group blame the government for either taking the power from parents to properly discipline their kids, or for not providing other means for the local youths, like recreational centers and sports field, to positively keep themselves busy during their free time, as to keep them away from the local taverns, where they eventually end up with a negative culture of binge drinking and drug intake. At their court appearance, the pair pleaded not guilty to the first count of selling liquor to underage children, as well as the second charge, which deals with forcing 2 of their staff members to sell intoxicating drinks to minors. Since the tragedy, the authorities have been considering whether to revise liquor licensing regulations within the country, especially because of the unhealthy relationship some South Africans have with alcohol. Some groups have also called for the pens down parties, mostly done by these high school matriculants, to be cancelled, as they do lack proper adult supervision. As of the time of making this video, the case remains ongoing, as some details continue to drag on. As for the tavern owners, they still speak of not being afraid of the verdict, in a story which they maintained wasn't their fault or to be blamed. And since then, they have been ordered to stop selling booze on the property and had to embark on other business ventures. Many months later, the parents of the victims, who are yet to find closure, were later told that the cause of the death was a result of, in quote, asphyxiation or suffocation, but that was rejected, stating that they still need the official documented copies of the toxicology reports to see for themselves, as that has not been revealed to them yet, even though they were promised that during the mass burial of their kids. Over the following months, following further forensic examinations which were later carried out, it would be determined that the 21 teenagers who died were exposed to some kind of methanol poisoning, as toxicology reports allegedly revealed that methanol were found in their blood. Methanol poisoning, also known as methanol toxicity, occurs when the natural ethanol in alcoholic beverages gets adulterated and made poisonous when it converts to methanol, and consuming unsafe quantities of it, even as little as 10 milliliters, can cause blindness, and over 15 to 100 milliliters, depending on body weight, can be broken down to formic acid, which causes much of the toxicity and then result to death. This alcohol is toxic and normally used industrially as a solvent for pesticide and also as an alternative fuel source. While naturally, small quantities can be found in an alcoholic beverage, significant quantities of it should not show up in blood samples when tested. The theory of an accidental methanol poisoning was deemed to be the most plausible by most people as the cause of the death. Most people believe that the local beverage, umngombuti, was allegedly improperly prepared by the tavern owners, or naturally became poisonous after subsequent preparation and storage, or might have been compromised at any point by someone. Due to the high rate of illegal alcohol production in South Africa, others speculated that it could have been illegal or fake or expired alcohol, which had been mixed with cheap methylated spirits or something along those lines. Other causes like drug intake have also been attributed as the cause, but till now, some elements of doubt still remain. Follow-up tests were also reportedly performed to determine whether the methanol concentrations were fatal, but the results have not been released, as the police told not being able to divulge details of the follow-up test, or even whether they have received the results. The office had declared the documents as, in quote, confidential. As of the time of telling this story, the families of the children, the affected community, and South Africans at large, as of 2023, still remain determined to see justice served for these children who died in such an unusual circumstance. But for now, many questions are still left unanswered, as the case is beginning to look like a dead end, and investigation might end up providing no clue as to the full story behind whom or what was behind the poisoning. But whatever comes of it, I will update as time goes on. In East London, what was supposed to be a regular weekend party turned into an unexpected tragedy, and for those affected, we hope they find the fortitude to bear the loss. These were bright youngsters whose family and community looked up to help contribute positively for their nation. They had dreams, and their whole lives was ahead of them, but which was taken, just like that. I do hope they continue to be remembered, especially by their respective families and those who knew them. And the 21 of them solely remain the focus in this story. I would like to say that if you're a lover of disturbing, dark, and mysteriously spooky true life horror stories, then you might consider doing all those lovely YouTube stuff on screen right now, as it truly helps the channel in making more videos like this.